You know that moment when someone asks how you're doing, and before you even think, your mouth says, fine? It's automatic, a social script, and sometimes you really are fine. But other times, you're carrying something heavy, and you just said the thing that closes the conversation fastest. Here's the thing. We've spent the last hour exploring why pretending you're fine when you're not makes things worse. The cognitive costs, the physiological damage, the relationship distance, the learned helplessness, the emotional rebound, the pessimistic thinking patterns, the lost information, the pseudo-well-being, the lack of processing skills, the psychological rigidity, all of it pointing to the same conclusion. Suppression doesn't work. It's expensive, it's damaging, and it undermines the very well-being you're trying to protect. But knowing why something doesn't work isn't the same as knowing what to do instead. And that's where a lot of this breaks down for people. You understand intellectually that you shouldn't suppress, but in the actual moment when someone asks how you're doing and you're not fine, what are you supposed to say? When you're in the meeting and you're upset and you need to function, what are you supposed to do? When you're lying in bed and everything you've been pushing down is trying to surface, how are you supposed to handle it? The practices we covered, the body awareness and the labeling and the expressive writing and the reappraisal, those are real. They're backed by research. They work. But they require something that's been missing from this conversation until now. They require that you believe you deserve to not be fine. Because here's what nobody talks about when they talk about emotional suppression. Most people aren't suppressing because they think it's the optimal strategy. They're suppressing because somewhere along the way, they learned that their emotional experience is a burden to themselves, to others, to the smooth functioning of life. Maybe you learned it from a parent who couldn't handle your distress. Maybe from a workplace that rewards appearing unflappable. Maybe from relationships where vulnerability felt dangerous. Maybe from a culture that tells you constantly that you should have it together, that struggle is weakness, that needing help is failure. However you learned it, the belief is the same. Your not fineness is a problem that needs to be hidden. And until you question that belief, all the techniques in the world won't help. You'll use them as better ways to suppress, more sophisticated methods of appearing okay, rather than as genuine tools for being present with your actual experience. So, before you try any of those practices, before you start the body awareness or the labeling or the writing, you need to ask yourself one question. Do I believe I'm allowed to not be fine? Not in theory, not in some abstract sense where, of course, everyone is allowed to have feelings, but actually, in your specific life, in your relationships, at your job, in your family, right now. Do you believe you're allowed? Because if the answer is no, or if the answer is, I don't know, then that's where the work actually starts. Not with techniques for processing emotion, but with examining the beliefs that make you think your emotions need to be hidden in the first place. Martin Seligman's work on learned helplessness showed that dogs could learn they were powerless, but he also showed they could unlearn it. The way they unlearned it was through direct experience of control, of seeing that their actions mattered. They had to be physically shown, sometimes dragged over the barrier repeatedly, until they started trying on their own. You need the same kind of direct experience, not with physical barriers, but with emotional ones. You need to experience, in small doses that you can actually manage, that acknowledging you're not fine doesn't destroy you, that being honest about struggle doesn't make people abandon you, that showing up as you actually are, imperfect and sometimes struggling, is not only survivable, but might actually deepen connection rather than destroying it. And you can't get that experience while you're still operating from the belief that your not fineness is unacceptable. So here's what I'm actually asking you to do, and it's simpler and harder than any technique. Question the story you've been telling yourself about why you have to be fine. Is it actually true that people will leave if you're honest about struggling? Or is that a fear based on past experience that might not apply now? Is it actually true that acknowledging difficulty means you're weak? Or is that a cultural message you've internalized without examining? Is it actually true that your emotions are too much, too intense, too burdensome for others to handle? Or were you told that by someone who couldn't handle their own discomfort with your feelings? Is it actually true that you should be over this by now, that you should be handling it better, that there's something wrong with you for still struggling? Or is that the pessimistic explanatory style we talked about, the permanent, pervasive, personal interpretation that creates helplessness? These aren't rhetorical questions, they're actual questions worth sitting with, because the answers, the real answers, might surprise you. You might find that the people you're protecting by pretending you're fine actually want to know you more fully. That the weakness you're afraid of showing is actually the vulnerability that creates real connection. That the emotions you think are too much are actually just emotions, intense sometimes but navigable, and that other people are more capable of being present with your difficulty than you've given them credit for. Or you might find that some of your fears are accurate, that some relationships or contexts really aren't safe for honesty. And that's important information too, because then you're not operating on vague anxiety about what might happen. You're operating on actual knowledge about what is and isn't possible in specific relationships and contexts. And you can make informed decisions about where to practice honesty and where strategic disclosure makes sense. But you can't get that clarity while you're suppressing everything everywhere. You're operating on fear and assumption rather than on tested reality. The research we've covered tonight gives you the why suppression is costly, why it doesn't work, why it makes things worse. That matters. Understanding the mechanisms helps you see that your struggle isn't personal failure. It's predictable outcome of a strategy that was never going to succeed. But the how, the actual path forward, requires more than technique. It requires examining and questioning the beliefs that made suppression seem necessary in the first place. It requires building evidence, through small experiments in honesty, that contradicts those beliefs. It requires developing trust, not just in other people's capacity to handle your not-fineness, but in your own capacity to navigate emotional experience without being destroyed by it. And here's the thing that might matter most. You don't have to do this perfectly. You don't have to become some idealized version of yourself who processes every emotion optimally and never suppresses and always communicates with perfect vulnerability. You just have to do it a little bit better than you're doing it now. A little more honest, a little more present, a little more willing to acknowledge what's actually true rather than performing what should be true, because that's all psychological flexibility is. Not perfection, not never struggling, just the ability to be a little more present with difficulty, a little more willing to feel what you're feeling, a little more capable of choosing your actions based on what matters rather than being controlled by avoidance. And resilience isn't bouncing back unscathed, it's bending without breaking. It's acknowledging when things are hard while still showing up. It's being honest about struggle while still taking the next step forward. Those things are available to you. Not someday when you've mastered all the techniques and healed all the wounds and become the person you think you should be. Right now. In whatever small way feels possible today. Maybe it's one honest answer to, "How are you doing?" Maybe it's 30 seconds of allowing an emotion to be present instead of immediately pushing it away. Maybe it's writing one paragraph about something difficult. Maybe it's telling one person one true thing about how you're actually doing. Whatever it is, it's enough. Not because it solves everything, but because it's practice, because it's evidence, because it's the beginning of a different relationship with your own emotional experience. The weight you've been carrying, you know what it is now. You know why it's heavy. You know what it's costing you. And you know, at least in theory, that you could set it down. The only question left is, do you believe you're allowed to? And if the answer is no, or if the answer is, I don't know, then that's okay. That's honest. That's actually the most important honesty, because you can't change a belief you won't acknowledge having. But once you acknowledge it, once you see that you've been operating from the assumption that your not-fineness is unacceptable, you can start to question it. You can start to test it. You can start to gather evidence that maybe, just maybe, you're allowed to be human, to struggle sometimes, to not have it all together, to need support, to be honest about difficulty. And that, permission, that allowance, that's where everything actually changes. Not in the techniques, not in the perfect application of research-backed strategies, but in the fundamental shift from, I have to hide this, to, I'm allowed to acknowledge this. From there, everything else becomes possible. Thank you for spending this time exploring why pretending you're fine makes things worse. More importantly, thank you for being willing to consider that maybe you don't have to keep pretending. You're not alone in this, and the path forward, imperfect and uncertain as it might be, is available to you whenever you're ready to take the first small step. You don't have to be fine, and that's actually, finally, genuinely okay.